Thank you very much, Mr. Professor, for your lecture. A teraz, ako dobre viete, bude priestor na diskusiu, keďže niektorí ste tu prvýkrát medzi nami, ale aj pre všetkých vás ostatných chcem pripomenúť pravidlá diskusie, takže kto má záujem, môže sa prihlásiť a potom na môj pokyn mikrofón poputuje k nemu. Poprosím každého, aby využil maximálne 2 minúty na konkrétnu otázku alebo námet, aby teda vyšlo na čo najviac z vás. A zároveň, teda, kto má záujem, môže sa aj predstaviť, to je dobrovoľné. Ale poprosím vás, aby ste povedali, že či sa spýtate alebo poviete svoj námet v slovenčine alebo v angličtine, aby sa mohol pán profesor pripraviť so zariadením tlmočníckym. Takže kto má záujem, nech sa páči, využite príležitosť prítomnosť pána profesora. Vidím prvú ruku vľavo v 4. rade, takže mikrofón vám už putuje.
I will ask my question in English. Okay, so thank you very much for this presentation. It was very interesting, and it made me think during your presentation about some movies that I found funny in the past, such as Liar, Liar, if you have seen that film, or there are other films where actually the main character or all the characters only can tell the truth, and it becomes quite a weird world if they do so. And so my question actually is, you said a little bit about that there's some evolutionary reason for this, that it happened in humans, why the brain functions in this way. You said it had maybe something to do with environment, but did you maybe go more in depth in your book about what would the world be? Would that be an advantage for us to switch, or why do we continue like this? I want to make a point actually that there are, it is said that some defects of the brain make people tell more the truth, and such as the Asperger's syndrome, for example. So my question again is, would that be today some kind of evolutionary advantage for us to stop lying to ourselves and become, start telling the truth?
In our past environment and our current environment, it looks very much like if you deviated from everybody else's behavior by telling the truth more, you would lose. Now, it's possible to imagine changing the environment enough to change those incentives. So, for example, if we had good mind readers that we attach to people and then we broadcast in some way the results of those mind readers, perhaps we could at least show people consciously lying. But most of the lying I've been talking about is unconscious. It would be much harder to extract via mind reader. Some people take our book as a self-help book, and they are disappointed because you can't just say, oh, I want to be the person I think I am, and I'm just going to will myself into it. Human nature is dug pretty deeply inside you. You probably can only make relatively minor changes consciously, especially by yourself. So I would just say this is what humans are. You're human, and you might do better to understand it. Anytime we see a difference between what we are and what we want to be, there's 2 ways to resolve that. One is to try harder to be what we wanted to be, and the other is to lower our standards and more accept what we are. And as a practical matter, we do both of those. Most of the time we find those deviations. So here, part of what you'll have to do here is accept more what you are, and part can be to try a bit to do better. I would put it as a resource allocation problem. You have a limited budget of honesty. Where will you spend it? What are the most important topics in your life where you're going to try harder to be honest, that maybe you can spend your limited budget on, and work your way down that list and see how far you can get? That is, take some area that you have not been as honest as you'd like to be about, try with one thing, I don't know, brushing your teeth, whatever it is, be a little more honest about that, make a habit of it, see if the habit sticks, and now try the next thing. That's, you know, the reliable way to slowly make improvements in anything is to do it piece by piece, one step at a time. So you can do that here too. But I wouldn't give you high hopes for being able to go a long distance. But you might be able to do it when it was the most important now that you realize. Another way it might be to say this is that this actually takes the pressure off of a lot of things. If you actually thought it was essential that you get to the hospital to get, or you would die, you'll be pretty scared. If you actually thought that unless you learn stuff at school, you will be outcompeted at workplace, you might be scared. Now that you know that you aren't actually learning that much at school, or that the hospital isn't actually helping that much, you can relax a bit about these things that you were really stressed about. In some sense, just being more honest with yourself about that, not so much with other people, means you can realize they're less important than you thought.
Thanks. Nech sa páči, tu v treťom rade vpravo vidím pána.
Hello, my name is Matusz. My question is in English. It's very simple. Why did you name your book Elephant in the Brain?
I didn't give you that. So there's the phrase, the elephant in the room, which denotes a topic that we all know is there, but we don't want to talk about. So we pretend the elephant isn't there. But the elephant is the image, you can't miss it if you look for it at all. And it kind of gets in the way of things, and you have to work to step around it, but we do often. So the elephant in your brain is the thing in your brain that we all kind of know is there, that we step around and pretend isn't, which is the fact that we're pretty selfish and we're trying to show off a lot.
Thank you.
Nech sa páči, vzadu vľavo.
Hi, I would like to ask, like, how do you, if you have many proofs, or how did you come up with the real motives? And if you mention studies, to what depth do you go into in describing them in the book? And maybe to mention one which was one study which was most surprising or funny for you.
So the structure of the argument here is to take major areas of life, identify what people say is the usual motive, and then collect a bunch of puzzles that don't fit. And then offer another motive that fits better with those puzzles. That isn't a proof. So there's no strong way to prove these alternative motives. In some sense, that should be impossible, very hard to do, because the point of an excuse is that it's plausible. When you have an excuse, the reason why you give an excuse is that you think your audience will find it believable. And so you make up excuses exactly because, given what people know, it's not crazy to think that. It's when you step back and look at the larger pattern of data that the excuses get harder to believe about the general pattern, even though you can't be sure in any one case. As I said, everything we do has many motives, so any one person could be unusual in what they're doing and have one of the unusual motives that's typically weaker be stronger in that case. There's no particular way you could prove that this person in that moment had that motive. What we're doing here is looking at the overall pattern of lots of, so I did mention many pieces of evidence here, such as, for example, that there's very little correlation between health and medicine, which is a surprising piece of data to people. That piece of data doesn't by itself prove that what we're doing is showing that we care. The basic theoretical exercise is to look at a whole set of puzzles and ask what explains all of those puzzles all at once with the fewest assumptions. And I'd say that's something actually social scientists neglect. So social scientists write papers and they make these big stacks of papers, each of which has a little clue about something. But it's much less common to take the best clues we have, spread them out and say, okay, what makes sense of all these clues all together at once? And that's the exercise I've been doing here. And it's based on those clues and saying that they make more sense.
Nech sa páči, vpredu v druhom rade.
Hello, I would like to ask about how these hidden motives tie into your concept of autarky, if they do in any way.
So I have a proposal for a form of government based on betting markets. And a potential problem with any proposal like that is that it might not fit with the reason people actually play politics and do governance. So, futarchy is designed to produce better political outcomes, but if people are not involved in politics to produce better political outcomes, they may not be interested in it. And in fact, they don't seem that interested. Relatedly, futarchy is the form of government where you create an explicit measure of national welfare. That is, you take something like GDP and you augment it with leisure and art prominence and international respect and whatever else you want, and then the government arguably would reliably achieve that end that you specify. And so if you specify a bad end, you'll get bad results. You specify a good end, you'll get good results. But plausibly, one thing that's happening in politics is people like to give lip service to something that they don't actually want to do. So they may say that trees are the most important thing, and we should never do anything to hurt trees, but then of course allow and approve policies that hurt a lot of trees. Today, our existing sort of political system enables that because politicians say things that they then don't do. And then we can all feel good about ourselves by supporting a politician who says the things we want to say, but who doesn't actually do them because we didn't actually want to do them. Futarchy will do the thing that we say, in the sense that if we produce a national welfare function that gives a lot of weight for trees, well, you know what, we're going to get a lot of trees. We will actually pay large costs to get trees if you put that weight into the welfare function. And so be careful what you ask for when you actually get it. Now, it could potentially be that there'll be enough distance from voter sentiment and discussion from the actual details of the welfare function that people could maintain this hypocrisy in this alternative world. But it's a concern. The simpler and more transparent this welfare function was, the more we'd be at risk for us choosing in the welfare function the thing we actually say we want and then looking bad because we don't like to admit it, or choosing the thing we say we want that we don't actually want and then getting it. And what are you going to do then?
Videl som dáma vľavom, nech sa páči.
Hello, and thank you for the presentation and very nice to see you in Bratislava. I had a question. When you were making that example about animals, and it was so we find a motivation for them, for example, kindness or generousness, but it is not. So, are things like kindness and like being generous to other people, are there some real things in between us human, or it's not at all such a thing, or how many levels we should go these things down to so we find the real motivation of the things?
All of the fake motives I've been talking about are real in the sense that they explain some fraction of people's behavior, some percentage of their motives. That's why they work as excuses. The dog ate my homework works as an excuse because sometimes dogs eat homework. It's not a lot, but it's enough that it's not a crazy thing to claim. The dragon ate my homework is just never used as an excuse because nobody believes that ever happens. So we pretend that we're being kind in part because kindness exists, it happens. That's why it can be a plausible excuse. It just doesn't happen as much as we pretend, but it's real and it exists.
But how about in animal society? So when we think like to animals, they've been kind to each other or generous to each other. So I know that's based on what I studied, that so it doesn't exist, like they're not generous to each other. But why we think that?
So,
but why we think that in a human it actually is, like because it exists, like we believe in it, it is something real in humans.
Even animals have a degree of caring for each other, and humans do. So we care because we share genes and we have sibling relationships. We care because we have reciprocal helping each other. Humans are very social and we have coalitions, and you care about other people in your coalition because your coalition partners help you. So if your spouse dies, that hurts you. And so you don't want your spouse to die. So that's a real concern about your spouse. I mean, it's mediated by the fact that they'll hurt you if they die, but it's a real concern. You don't want them to die. So we actually do actually care about people around us, in part because they help us, but it's still a real concern. And animals also have that same level of real concern, but it's just not as much as you might think. It doesn't explain why that bird is on the top of the bush. The bird, if it was merely because the bird cared a bit about their bird partners, that might then make them on the margin more likely to give a little warning, but it doesn't put them on the top of the bush, sitting there all the time, ready to make the warning. That's a much stronger action that needs a stronger motive to explain.
Thank you.
Ďakujem. Nech sa páči, kto ďalší vpredu v prvom rade.
Hello, thank you for coming here to deliver this lecture. So, I heard about this term futarchy. I don't really know much about it, but it really piqued my interest, and so I would like to know, has this or something akin to it been tried on any scale?
So, since it's the second question on the topic, I will take the liberty of taking a little longer to explain. A simple example would be firing CEOs. So, most firms have a chief executive officer, and sometimes the board of directors gets rid of the existing CEO and replaces them with a new one. They do that, and should do that, when the existing one isn't working out very well. They're not helping as much as somebody else would. So this is a key question of how to decide when to get rid of your current CEO and replace them with a new one. So here's a following way a mechanism for doing that. An ordinary stock market trades stock for cash. If it's 19 cash for one stock, then the price is 19. And when you estimate the value of a stock in that market, you have to think about all the different scenarios that this company could be involved in. And in each scenario, ask how much is that company worth in that scenario. And now you need to average over all those scenarios to come up with 19. If you come up with 20 when you average over them, then you should buy the stock and push it up. If you come up with 18, you should sell. So instead of the ordinary stock market, now we're going to have a separate stock market where the trades are called off when a condition isn't met. That is, we're going to have a stock market conditional on the CEO staying in office until the end of the quarter. And we're going to have a stock market conditional on the CEO leaving the company by the end of the quarter. That is, a trade happens only if this condition is met. So here you will trade stock for cash, but that trade will be undone and canceled if this condition isn't met. There's several ways to do this mechanically, but that's the simplest way to explain it. So now when you're betting in this conditional market, you will again average over a great many scenarios, but only the scenarios consistent with this assumption that the CEO will stay or that they'll leave, because if that assumption isn't met, your trade doesn't exist. So the value of your trade is only in the world where that assumption is met. So now you'll have two different prices. One is the price estimated for the company if the CEO leaves, and the other is the price estimated for the company if the CEO stays. If those are different numbers, the market is now telling you whether they think the company is worth more or less with the CEO in charge. That is an example of what I call a decision market. There's an outcome, the value of the stock price. There's a choice whether to fire the CEO, and you're creating market estimates that estimate the outcome given the choice. And then the difference in those outcome estimates can be advice about what choice to make. So that is in essence futarchy for firing the CEO. You'd say, let's just fire him when the prices say that we'd be worth better without him, and don't fire him otherwise. And if I had $1 million, I would actually try to create a market for the entire Fortune 500 where I looked for those 1,000 markets and tracked those companies, and over a few years might be able to show that the companies that followed the market advice did better. And then I might pressure boards of directors. So that's a concrete example. Futarchy is the more general mechanism than of doing governance with a process like that. But now instead of the stock price of a company, we have some other metric of the value for some organization, which I would call national welfare. And now instead of just firing the CEO, we have other decisions we also make in the same manner. But the key point is to look at that difference in prices, if we do it, if we don't. And so you can see this brings the power of speculative markets into producing reliable estimates on the consequences of our actions. So I would say the major failing with existing political institutions is that we just don't act on our best informed beliefs about the consequences of our actions. We just do a lot of stuff that's stupid because we don't know better. So this would at least produce knowledgeable actions. It's still vulnerable to whatever the outcome that people choose to use. If you think a company making more profits is bad for the world, then you don't like my fire the CEO mechanism because you think that it'll choose the wrong CEO. But if a group chooses an outcome that matches their priorities, then they might, get more out of it. So for example, you could do governance for a conference based on estimating the number of people who will attend the conference. You could say, well, what speakers should we invite, and where should we hold it, and what price should we charge, etc. And then you might find out from that who speculators think will be the structure and invitees to have your conference that will bring the most people. Of course, if bringing the most people isn't what you want, you might not get what you want. That's the idea. That's a longer-winded answer.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sa páči, v treťom rade správa.
Thank you very much. I'll also ask in English, as most people. I would like to ask, you mentioned it partially in your talk about the psychology of the process, and I'm thinking, how much do you see the connection between all these pretended motives and pretended or sought outcomes, and the mental diseases people have of too much stress or too much, mental deformities people have of basically not focusing on what they actually want, but maybe focusing on what the society dictates that they should be, working towards, whether it's a career or, any of those kinds of outcomes.
It would be nice to believe that being good makes you healthy. In this context, it's being honest makes you more mentally healthy. That would be a nice, ideal thing to believe about the world, but I don't believe it. I don't believe that being good makes you healthy in general. It may do in some contexts, but here, this is just human nature. This is how most people are. If you are healthy and well-structured, you do the usual thing, which is this. More likely, if you are broken in some way, that's when that causes you to deviate and to be hurt. That is, in some sense, you expect it's the broken people who are more honest in ways that they suffer because the world's rewarding something else.
Thanks. V prvom rade, nech sa páči.
Thanks, Peter, for this opportunity for my signaling. Radovan Jurana Ines. My son does not laugh when he's alone. My daughter neither. But I do. Why adults laugh alone and kids not?
I have no idea.
I was just thinking that, from my perspective, I mostly laugh when women are attending. I always thought that laugh serves as a tool for sexual being attractive, finding partner.
So I'll answer a related question, which is, why are the young more idealistic? So plausibly, so think about buying a phone contract or something. When you have a phone contract and you call up your supplier and say, please lower my price or I'm leaving, you want to be able to convince them you would actually leave. So you want to get them to believe you have low switching costs, that you would easily leave if they don't give you a better deal. But when you're a new customer, you want them to believe you have a high switching cost. Then they will offer you a better deal up front because they expect to lock you in later. So the same thing happens in relationships. Early in our life, we are all trying to give the impression that we are the sort of person that if we get connected to someone, we are just stuck on them and we just won't leave. Whereas later in life, we want to give the impression that if you don't treat me right, I'm out of here. And which are different impressions you want to give at different points in your life. So early in life, most people have not yet made their major social associations in their life. They don't have their major colleagues, they don't have their major friends, they don't have their major lovers or partners. And so at that point in their life, they want to give the impression that they would be a great partner in the sense that they are principled, they are passionate about their partners, they are very loyal to their partners, and they just find it very difficult to betray their partners or leave. That's just the sort of person they are. And so young people want to project that sort of idealistic persona, that they just care about things a lot and they're just very, very helpful. Whereas later in life, you have your major associations. you have your connections, and it's mainly negotiating with those connections. You're trying to convince them that if they don't treat you well, you're leaving. Of course, they hardly ever leave, but they still want to act like they might. And so later off in life, people are less idealistic. They're more trying to show that they are tough and, and they would be willing to pull the trigger if you push them too hard. And that's related in the sense that that's part of why people are more social when they're younger. They're more social because they are shopping for associations. They're trying to look around for people who could be associates later in life and to find those associates. But then once you have your major associates, you don't need to shop so much. And
So the laughter is rather a form rather than motive. The play as a part of laughter is rather a form of getting these associations, but the real motive is like being either have a position in a society or find a partner. That's the real motive of laughter.
For laughter?
Yes.
So I was talking about laughter as a we're still playing signal. So just while you're interacting with people, it might seem like you're getting hurt and you say, no, I'm fine. So when you see a comedian even speaking, the point at which people laugh is the point at which people might feel threatened, and they're saying, I don't feel threatened. Just when they say something that might seem politically incorrect or something, that's exactly when people laugh, because they go, haha, we don't mind, we won't bother you about that.
Thanks. Dostal som signál, že aj vzadu sa hlasí niekto dlhšie, čiže vzadu vpravo, nech sa páči.
Thank you very much. My name is Tomáš, and as other people in this room, I will also ask in English to show off. And also to show some loyalty, I must tell that this is the most funny and the most insulting way to introduce evolutionary psychology. So thank you very much, Professor. Well, my question is about the self-help. You say that some people read your book as a self-help book, but they are disappointed then. But is there any takeaway for them? Because I would expect that there might be some, like from game theory, I think that the takeaway would be follow your dominant strategy. So what's the takeaway from your perspective? Thank you very much.
If you are willing to be realistic about what's possible, then of course understanding the world better is useful for self-help. The problem is people tend to hear that they are not the ideal that they wish they were, and then immediately decide that they should go to work to become the ideal that they wish they were and think that's feasible. And then they're disappointed to find that that's not at all feasible. So the problem is that many people who read my book are idealists, they're young idealists, and they have high opinions of what they should be. They think they should donate a lot to charity, they think they should do the thing that will help the world the most, etc. They think they should be really honest about everything. And as you may know, a 20-year-old person like that often believes that's possible. They make that a plan for their life, and they start to act on that plan with the intention of being the person they want to be. And they're going to be disappointed. That's just not feasible. They can be better than they were, they can be better than other people, they can make a contribution, they can help, but they can't just will themselves to be the ideal person they wish they were. That's just not feasible. And so that's the sense in which I'd say people are disappointed because we are shining this harsh light on what people actually are, and many people didn't realize that they were this far below their ideals, and their first reaction is to determine, to will themselves to become their ideal.
Thank you very much. Nech sa páči, vzadu, úplne vľavo, dáma.
Hello, Mr. Hanson. My name is Pravda, and thank you for your lecture. I have two questions for you. First is, what is your motivation to come to Bratislava and then give us this lecture? And the second question is, do you see any elephant in this room? Thank you.
Sure. So in our book, we go out of our way in the section on conversation to say we probably have the motives most everybody else has who does the sort of things we do. And in general, I would say, if you want to ask what are your personal motives, the first simple strategy is to say, well, what do other people have as motives when they do the sort of things I do? And just assume you're like them. Don't give yourself the benefit of the doubt of being better or different. Just assume you're like everybody else who's doing what you're doing. And so I'm happy to take that strategy with respect to myself and say, I'm like everybody else who is a speaker or an intellectual. I want to be liked, I want to be respected, I want people to talk about me and remember me. You know, just like everybody else, I'm that shallow. But of course, I also have a percentage of my motivation is that I would like the world to be better and improved in this way, but these two things are aligned, so I don't actually have to choose between them. I have in my intellectual world sometimes had to choose between doing the thing that would make me more popular and doing the thing that would teach the world better, and that's a more agonizing choice. I've made it both ways at different times. The elephant in this room is probably the fact that you're all here and you don't actually care that much about this topic. You are here typically to socialize, to meet each other, to have a night out, to maybe ask a smart-sounding question and get people to nod at your smile. That's why most people are at events like this. I'm not saying you're different than most people in the world. I would just say that's the, given this talk, the elephant in the room is that my talk applies to you now, just like it applies to you all the time. But here in this context, again, you're flirting. You are here being serious, but you will flirt with each other tonight. And you will deny it if anybody asks. But you will have status moves as you chat with somebody else. You will deny that to a past. You just laughed. Why did you laugh? The theory on that, because you feel a little safe. I'm pointing out your hypocrisy, but you feel kind of safe about it here. So you laugh to show that that's okay. You're okay. You don't feel that threatened at the moment. You want more?
Nech sa páči. V strede pán. Ďalší signál.
So, religious people are winning. They are healthier, they have longer life and so on. So, what do non-religious people can do not to lose? Is there any way other than become religious?
You can do other things that aren't formally called religious that have similar functions. You can join groups and show that you're bonded to them and get the benefit of showing loyalty to groups. If you refuse to adopt crazy beliefs in service of your group, you'll have to find something else to show them your devotion to them. Apparently you're withholding that one thing from them, and they may resent that, but they may accept the other things you give them. Groups aren't that particular always that you always do everything to show loyalty, but they do want major things to show loyalty, and you'll have to give up things to do that. And that hurts.
Všimol som si, že tu vpredu pán mladý muž, ktorý už počas prednášky rád chcel diskutovať, tak nech sa páči, máte priestor.
I want to ask about speaking the truth. People who meditate or take psychedelics speak more truth because the hippocampus is smaller, so they think less emotionally and more logically. Is it true? Do you study this topic?
I wouldn't endorse any very simple correlation along the lines that people who are less emotional are more truthful, or people who meditate more are more truthful. That just sounds like way too easy.
Logic doesn't correlate to truth. I'm trying.
So, I'm actually affiliated with a community of people called rationalists, because I have this blog Overcoming Bias, and the community came out of this blog, although I wasn't involved that much. But this community of people is focused on being rational, and so they like to find rationality exercises. They like to learn about biases and to do little tests. And I'm less optimistic that that works. It could work in the test, but when you actually have a thing you really care about, people often toss out all this stuff and just go with what they want to say. I'm more optimistic about making yourself more rational by changing your incentives. So for example, if you bet with people, there's a strong observation that people are often very confident in saying something. As soon as you say, will you bet on that? All of a sudden they revise what they meant. They wonder, well, is this literally true? And they hedge about the words and they hedge about the conditions, because as soon as they have a real incentive to be right or wrong, then they are more careful.
So it's skin in the game.
Yes, exactly. Another thing you can do is to make public pronouncements about things that you will be tested on later, and then you would be embarrassed if you're wrong. Those are also ways to make yourself more honest, which, create the incentives that if you're wrong, you will lose, and you will be more likely to be honest. Those are straightforward ways that most people know about but don't want to do. So maybe they don't really want to be honest.
Ďakujem. Má niekto ešte záujem? Využite príležitosť vzácnu. Vidím vľavo pán.
Thank you very much for your lecture. My name is Dusan from Parallel Police. I would like to ask first a practical question. What are your 3 most impactful habits that you took from this knowledge that you put into the book that really impacted your life the most? And second, as we spoke about the skin in the game, so how does skin in the game applies in the futarchy when betting?
Well, the second question is easier. Futarchy is basically where people who are speculating and betting are the ones deciding which policies work. So then, if they're wrong, they lose. So that's the whole point. They make conditional forecasts about what happens if we adopt a policy, and then the ones who are accurate about those conditional forecasts make money, and the ones who aren't lose money. And so the whole point is to use that power to get accurate forecasts about the consequences of our actions. That's how skin in the game works for futarchy. I don't know that I have any habits I've acquired because I wrote the book. I've had habits I've acquired over a lifetime, and some of them are useful or not, but this is a relatively recent book, and I'm not sure I would say that it changed my habits. This is a relatively intellectual exercise. I'm trying to make sense of the world, primarily here. We are trying to make sense of the world. We're trying to come to terms with a frustration I've had all my life, which is people don't seem very interested in social innovation, and they don't seem very puzzled by a lot of things that I've thought were puzzling in terms of our behavior. So this certainly, reinforced for me the idea that there's a lot of other puzzles out there we can go look for. And also reinforced for me that people don't really care. So I might have thought, well, geez, I'll open the dam here with showing, look at all these hidden motives. There must be a lot more. People will be really eager to go study more, and they aren't. People are not eager to go find more hidden motives. They will not politely say that we found some here, but they don't want to know what the rest of them are. That's a striking fact about human behavior. That at some level we kind of know that we know the stuff we don't want to know. Unfortunately.
Nech sa páči. Má niekto záujem sa ešte spýtať alebo povedať? Vidím vpravo ešte záujem.
Good evening. My name is Zuzana, and I would like to ask you, what is your opinion? What is maybe the true or original motive of people getting married? Thank you.
Well, relationships are one of our most complicated things we do, especially romantic relationships or marriage relationships. So there's a lot of relevant motives going on. And in different societies, they've emphasized different ones. So, say in 1,000 years ago or longer, if you told someone, I've fallen in love, they'd say, I'm very sorry. Because the consensus was that was a terrible thing to have happen to you, because so many things do go wrong there. Marriage was less about falling in love and more about other things, although people did fall in love. Today we say it's about romance, and we focus on the romance, but it still has all those other functions it ever did. We say we care about a great deep romantic relationship, but honestly, if you look at people's life trajectory, they're okay with getting less romance later. I think maybe people aren't quite as eager for romance as they pretend because they like romance, but they like other things and they're okay with compromising there. And marriage is in some part a compromise, a long-term relationship where you get less of the short-term things and more long-term things, and in some sense people are okay with that. But people have to say that marriage is about one thing because everybody expects you to say about that. So people don't really, at a marriage ceremony, you're not supposed to say, well, I've decided that this is my best package of options here. I think we're compatible in these ways, and they're not so compatible in that, and that, it was the best option I had. That's not what people want to hear you say, even if it's true. They want to hear that this is, your hearts were fluttering and butterflies, and this is just, you're so fantastically happy, and this is going to be so great, which of course, people know at some level isn't true. So there's this concept of limerence, or this emotional sense of being in love, and we know that, with that, people are just way overly optimistic about how long their relationships will last and how great they will be, and at some level, people know they're wrong in that way, but in the moment, people are wrong, and they're expected to be wrong. And in some sense, this is, again, the same sort of youthful idealism. You're trying to convince your partner that you're able to believe this crazy thing. Like with religion, you're bonding to your partner by kind of believing this crazy belief that you're going to be together forever and it's going to be just as happy as it always was. Because your willingness to go that far in this crazy belief is part of the signal that you're willing to pay high cost to be with them. Just like having a crazy religious belief is a high cost to be with the group. The crazy romantic belief is a high cost to be with a romantic partner. You do suffer in the sense that when you have that crazy belief and often it goes wrong, then you are blindsided and really hurt, and that's the cost you pay to have that exaggerated confidence that is the signal of willing to pay a cost to be with someone.
Ďakujem. Ešte vidím v štvrtom rade.
Hi, I would like to ask if you could explain the hidden motives in the area of parenting.
My
the main hidden motive?
colleague Brian Kaplan, who had the book, The Case Against Education that I mentioned, had a prior book called The Selfish Reason to Have More Kids. And he talks about how in our society we have these beliefs that you should do massive amounts of parenting, that you should put enormous amounts of time and energy into parenting, which is quite different than most other societies have done. And so he goes over evidence that in fact you don't have as much influence over your kids as you think in terms of their future outcomes. You can influence whether they're happy when they're with you, and it's good that they're not miserable with you, but you can't do as much as people seem to think about making their future careers go better by, playing them violins while they're in the womb, etc. So clearly in our society we have some beliefs about parenting that don't fit these evidence, and you might say, well, what's the point of that? It's an obvious loyalty option, which is you're trying to showing your partner and other people around you that you're very loyal and committed to your children. And if other people are doing a lot to show loyalty, you kind of have to do a lot, otherwise you feel like you're not showing that you care about your kids as much, and that feels bad because you want to show them you care a lot. And so we do a lot that isn't really necessary because we want to show. It's related to sort of, there's some big major trends over the last few centuries about how humans have changed their behavior. And the basic question is, why have we changed the fraction of our budget that we spent on some things? So we've spent more on medicine than we used to as a fraction of budget, and more on parenting. Why? And more on school. Why those things? Even more on finance. And so it plausibly looks like that as we get rich, we are spending more on social signaling. That is, our basic needs are met and we're focused more on relative status and making other people like us. A way to think about it is, for our distant ancestors, they had bad times and good times. In bad times, you might starve to death, and people were very focused on very functional, getting food, etc. In good times, you might ask, well, everything is going fine, what should I do? Well, I should focus on investing in things that will be good and valuable in bad times. Now, for our distant ancestors, they couldn't make stocks of coconuts or things like that, so the main thing they could invest in was other people. By collecting relationships and loyalty in good times, then you could draw on those in bad times. And so the idea is that as we get rich, we switch into this mode that we're focused on collecting social investments for bad times, for future bad times that in the past always came. And so how do we invest in relationships? More medicine, if medicine is showing that we care. More school, if school is a way to show off. More parenting, if that's a way to show our loyalty to our children and our family.
Thanks. Jozef, posledná otázka, last question. Tuto vpravo, dáma.
Hi. So, to sum up, do you believe that the humans are basically selfish and self-centered? And is there a future for us? Will we ever change, or will this stay the same?
If you compare humans to all the other species on the planet, we are spectacularly successful at cooperating. Okay? We beat all the other animals by a long shot at our spectacular range and detail and types of cooperation. In terms of ability to work together and get along and do things together, we are way, way past all the other animals. So we might be doing that because we're selfish, but fine, we're doing it. And so we've had this spectacular run of success, and we don't look like we're anywhere near the end of it. And so quite plausibly, we will continue to increase our ability to cooperate and to work together to get things done. And that will continue to produce more, better ways to cooperate, such as futarchy. And, but behind all of that, in the end, may be a selfishness that we pretend isn't there. But that's been going okay so far, so why not? Keep it, let it ride.
It doesn't have to be bad. So.
Well, in a sense, evolutionarily, we just expect pretty much any creature to have some degree of selfishness. I mean, it's just hard to imagine creatures evolving who don't have some modest amount of selfishness attending to the possibility of betrayal and others cheating us, etc. So we at least have that degree of selfishness. Doesn't matter if selfish. So I have this other book on the Age of M. It's about a future scenario where brain emulations dominate the world. And near the end of this book, I talk about how people might evaluate this world. And I note that there's a survey where people looked at the year 2050 and they said, and they were asked basically, well, what do you want to know about this world to decide if you like it? Do you approve of the future? And it turned out people were not that interested in how healthy they were, or how rich they were, or how well read they were. The main thing everybody wanted to know is how kind they were. Kind people in the future, good future. Not so kind people, not so good future. I don't buy that. I don't need them to be that kind. I want them to be healthy and long-lived and, entertained and engaged. And I don't need them to be that kind. As long as they're about as kind as people have always been, I'll be okay with that.
Thank you very much to you, Mr.
Thank you all.
Professor, for your lecture. Myslím si, že sme si to všetci užili. Ďakujem aj vám, že ste prišli, že ste boli aktívni a pevne verím, že o niekoľko mesiacov sa opäť stretneme, takže všetko dobré vám prajem. Dovidenia.